Hello, welcome to Tales from the House. Today, the 16th of April, in time. 3 events for you again today, and I'm going to start. I'll try to be a little bit quicker because I do talk too much. So let me share my screen with you, and let's get on with the first event from today, which is the oldest event thus far. I'm going back to 609 BC. Yes. What on earth could have happened then that has any relevance to today? It's the Battle of Megiddo. And the Battle of Megiddo is basically a battle in modern day Israel, Palestine, between this guy, the Pharaoh Necho II of Egypt, who was leading an army to fight up in Syria and had to pass through modern day Palestine, Israel. Which was then the Kingdom of Judea. And what he wanted to do was simply pass through and get on, make his fight. But King Josiah of the Judeans refused to let him through. And thus a battle ensued at the town of Megiddo. And I think I have that here. Here is Josiah, by the way. Yes, he looked absolutely like that. I think this is from some Mormon film. But anyway, yes, he definitely looked a lot like that. This is the town of Megiddo today, the ancient town of Megiddo. It looks like it's on a mountain, but actually that's just the result of hundreds and thousands of years of building on top of each other. But these are the ruins. This is where this battle happened. The Egyptians defeated the Judeans, who then retreated back into the walls of the city. A siege took place and Megiddo fell. Now, it isn't terribly important, other than this is the site that the Bible prophesied would be the Judgment Day. Yes, indeed. That's the only reason we're talking about Megiddo, because in Revelation chapter 16, the Bible says that the final conflict on Judgment Day between the forces of good and evil will take place in a battle here at Megiddo. This cataclysmic battle is between the armies of the beast and the angels of the Lord, who would come down one at a time to inflict their, defeat upon the armies of the beast. And it's a cataclysmic battle for the end of time. It's in the Christian Bible, in Revelation. It's also recognized in Islamic theology. And why do we care about this prediction? Because Megiddo is the place, is the reason we have the word Armageddon. That sort of total destruction comes from this, and it's Armageddon that is talked about in Revelations, and in Revelation 16:16, it is the city of Megiddo where Armageddon, that final battle between good and evil, takes place. So there you are. Today, in 609 BC, there was a battle at Megiddo that went down in Judean history and gives us today the term for the end of the world, Armageddon. All right, let's move on. It's another battle, I'm afraid. This one spelt Armageddon for the Scots, which is sadly nothing unusual, particularly, Braveheart aside. And it's between this guy here, who is Charles Edward Stuart, better known to the rest of us perhaps as Bonnie Prince Charlie or the Young Pretender. Now, a little bit of background here. He's called the Young Pretender, not because he's pretending to be anything, but that is the official name for somebody who has a genuine claim to the throne, in this case, the throne of England. So he has a genuine claim because his grandfather was the King of England, James II, and he got thrown out because of his, he'd converted to Catholicism, and the British Parliament, the English state, didn't want a Catholic rule in the country. So he got thrown out, basically, and we invited William of Mary of Orange from Flanders to come and take the throne instead, provided they had zero power and Parliament had all the power. And I suppose our modern democracy kind of really starts, and parliamentary democracy starts there, where the monarchs had no power. In any case, James goes into exile, and you've got the old pretender, his son, and then you've got the young pretender, Bonnie Prince Charlie here. Well, he wants to come back and claim his rightful throne, and he does have a right to it. So he lands with about a dozen men, in Edinburgh, north of Edinburgh, in 1745. He raises an army, and he takes Edinburgh very quickly, gathers an even larger army, rallies the Highlands into rebellion, and marches south. Why have I got this map up? Because his armies marched all the way down to Derby, unopposed. And the idea, he thought, was not only will I rouse Scotland, but I will rouse the rest of England against this sort of Germanic rule of the Hanoverians. George II is on the throne at this point in time. But he gets to Derby, and they've only got a force of about 6,000 men. And the closer they get further south, the more likely they are to face a very large force of the domestic English government. And what had happened was that he hadn't had the rousing support of the English joining this rebellion by the time he gets to Derby. So, fearing the worst, he decides he's got to retreat, hope that the French will come to support the Scots, as they often had done historically, and try to hold Scotland or defeat the English there or come back at another point in time. But this didn't happen either. At this point in time, England recall from Flanders their current greatest general, the 25-year-old, I think this is much later because he's quite unshapely there, but the 25-year-old Duke of Cumberland, the finest British general of the moment. And it is him who then takes command of the army to a great rise in morale of the English government forces and follows chasing Bonnie Prince Charlie back to Scotland. And they chase them all the way to Inverness, where we have the Battle of Cullodon. 1746, after the 1745 rebellion, Jacobite rebellion of Bonnie Prince Charlie, they've come all the way to Derby, they go all the way back, and now an English force commanded by by Cumberland meets them on the field at Cullodon. But this turned out to be quite the disaster for the Scottish. They didn't actually want to fight at Cullodon. They were busy looking for a better place to situate their army when the battle commenced. And so it wasn't their choice. They were looking for better ground, but the commanders couldn't agree where else they might like to fight. What they had also tried to do is they tried to repeat their victory at Preston Pans over the English by a night raid on the English camp. The English were celebrating. 2 barrels of brandy had been cracked open the night before battle for every regiment in the English government forces to celebrate the Duke of Cumberland's 25th birthday. And the Scots thought, well, let's take advantage of this and try and attack by night and catch them by surprise. They outnumber us and perhaps we can have a famous victory. It's not a bad idea. But they set off too late in the night and it took them too long to get there. They weren't on the roads, so they lost sight of each other and they were all over the place. And it ends up being called off near dawn when they're still some far a distance away. And, some forces know it's been called off for retreat. Some don't and encounter the English waking up early in the morning and organize themselves. And the whole thing is a disaster. Largely, they did this trek through the night. They all ended up going back without having attacking. And the Duke of Cumberland's forces are up at 5 a.m. and marching to meet them at the field of Cullodon. And the Scots are knackered, disorganized. And they've put what was a bad situation with it being outnumbered on unfavorable ground into an even worse situation. The Duke of Cumberland, meanwhile, had been training his soldiers. And he had issued an instruction that there would be no quarter on the battlefield. In that case, traditionally, you didn't kill a man who had his back to you and was leaving the field. You also didn't kill a man without a weapon or a man who was injured. Well, when you give no quarter, all of those things are out of the window. And anybody who is simply on the other side, be they injured, wounded, or unarmed, is killed. I mean, it's really very frowned upon. Strange to say that in war, but there you go. So he had issued the order that there would be no quarter given by his army. He'd also trained them, as you can just about see in this picture, to move as a line, fire their volley of shots, and then I'd stand up here and show you, but I don't have any trousers on. I've got pants. But then he'd fire volley of shots and then bayonet to the right. But everybody has to stay in line. Why? Because, as you can see from this picture here, the Scots were armed with their traditional weaponry. Shield on the left hand, sword in the right. If the Scots were to make any thrust like that, they exposed their right-hand side, which left the English army available to bayonet the right-hand side of the person in front of them. This shattered the Scots centre and Scots left, as well as the discipline in the volley of fire, and the Scots were pretty quickly routed. It was a total disaster for them. There were, I think, about 1,500 to 2,000 dead on the Scottish side, for only about 150 on the government English forces side. So a total rout. They dissipated. They fled to Inverness and then elsewhere. And the English soldiers wandered the battlefield, giving no quarter and killing the wounded. There is a story of Cumberland himself discovering a wounded man at his feet was actually a Scots fighter, and he instructed his nearest major to shoot him and kill him on the where he lay, and the major, risking disgrace and arrest and court-martial, refused his own general's instructions. He said, I'm not going to do that. This man is in. I flatly refused. At which point Cumberland issued an order to a nearby private to execute the man on the floor and fulfill this instruction of no quarter. Incidentally, that major who refused that instruction was Major Wolfe, who went on to be one of the finest generals of the English army ever, by taking Quebec in an incredible scale up a cliff, leading a force personally. Wolfe fell at Quebec and came home a national hero 13 years later. But it's good to see he always had the right qualities and denied Cumberland's instruction there, at risk to himself as well. So there you are, a crushing defeat for the Scots by the government forces. The Jacobite rebellion of 45 was over. No French support had come. What happened to Bonnie Prince Charlie? He disappeared into the wilderness of Scotland. For about 5 months, he wandered from place to place, facing capture at every moment, until he was able to finally flee to France. He became a drunkard and died at the age of 67 in Rome. And this is his tomb in St. Peter's Basilica, of all places. If you go to St. Peter's in the Vatican, you can see this tomb, which houses the remains of Bonnie Prince Charlie. And with that defeat at Cullodon, ends any genuine hope of a Stuart revival to the throne. Cullodon is also important because it is the very last pitched battle that was ever fought on the islands of Great Britain. So another significant first there. And if you go to the battlefield today, you'll find some of these stones that show you where various clans were killed and their bodies were found. And there's also a large cairn who signify on the field of Cullodon the battle taking place here. Today, 1746. There we are then. Cullodon, 16th of April, 1746. Third and final story today, cracking one. This is about Colditz. Now, when I talk to you about Colditz, or when it comes into my mind, the first thing that comes into my mind is this board game from when I was a child, probably in the 80s, where you had the castle of Colditz prison, and you had someone played one side, the German soldiers, the black pawns, Skittles here, and then you played the other side. People could play different types of soldiers from different nationalities, and you had to try and plan an escape. And you can see up in the corner up here that you could get ropes, and you could gather materials and keys and passes and disguises, and you had to try to escape Colditz Castle. And that's what comes to mind. What a strange, bizarre sort of game this was. But I tell you, it's an absolutely cracking game, Escape from Colditz. And thinking about this today, I'm going to go and buy it. I hope they still sell it. And if not, eBay is my friend. But the thing about this game is it was actually designed and produced by a prisoner of war in World War II who escaped from Colditz himself. A guy called Pat Reed made it. Colditz, if you're not sure, was a German prison. It's here, well inside Germany. I've got a picture of it. Let me see if I can give you a better picture of it. Yes, this is Colditz Castle. And it was a Nazi prison during World War II, and one of the most famous, and I'll try to tell you why in a moment. People, Pat Reed escaped from this prison, but to Switzerland and made it home at the end of the war, and then made, curiously, after being a prisoner in World War II in one of the most famous prisons, made a board game out of it, which lots of us as youngsters enjoyed. So there you go. He escaped in 1942 to Switzerland. This was a special prison, though, because it housed officers of the various armies, and it was meant for people who were an escape risk. So anyone who had escaped from another German prisoner of war camp, or who was considered highly dangerous and likely to escape, or who had been recaptured, or whatever. Escapees from other prisons were sent to Colditz, because this place you couldn't escape from, and this place would be heavily guarded. And what made it so special? Well, its location, which is why I have this map up here. It's 400 miles from any other border of a nation that is not under Nazi control in World War II. So even if you get out, you've got a long way to try to go anywhere else to escape it. But also, if I go back to this picture, it's built on a massive cliff above a river, and it's a 230-foot drop from the base of this castle to the river below. So, I mean, getting out of that is going to be very, very difficult as well. And it had been a castle for 1,000 years. So there's also this psychological symbol of the permanence of the German state. And all of the most significant prisoners of war of various nations, Polish, French, Commonwealth and British, were kept here. There were about 500 of these officer prisoners who were escapees from elsewhere that were kept here during the war. And there are some notable prisoners who were kept there. Airy Neve, British MP, he was kept here. And so was Douglas Bader. Yes, the famous RAF pilot with no leg. He had been shot down in 1941. He was a group commander, and he was the developer of the big wing theory in the Battle of Britain to defend Britain from Nazi attack. More about him on another day, I think. Suffice to say that he was an inmate in Colditz from 1941 until the end of the war. But also Sir David Stirling, this fella here. Well, what's him? You might recognize from the cat badge that this man is the guy who invented the SAS, the Special Air Service. He was captured in 1943 on one of his crazy missions with small teams of people. And he escaped 4 times from prisoner of war camps and was eventually, therefore, as an escapee, transferred to Colditz, where he saw out the end of his war. 2 nephews of George VI were here, and the son of Field Marshal Haig. So a prison of some repute. There were, of course, some classic escape attempts, and people did escape. There were 32 escapes from Colditz, which is not that many, considering that 4 would escape at a time, for example. Only 15 of those 32 ever made it out. And 11 of the 15, I think, were British. Oh, no, 11 of the 32 were British. So, I mean, there is the classic bed sheet tied in a knot, and they needed quite a lot of them, as you can see here, to escape. One guy hid in a crate because he was really small, a bit like that fella in Ocean's 11. Somebody else cut open a mattress and had it sewed back together, and he hid inside of a mattress that was being thrown out. Another guy dressed as a German lady and left with the cleaners, and was quite a convincing lady, and made his way all the way to Danzig to try and get a boat to Sweden before he was discovered. I mean, that's several hundred miles away, acting and dressing as a lady the entire time. I'm not sure what that says about German middle-aged ladies at the time, or what it says about the fellow who was trying to escape. But perhaps the most famous, I mean, obviously there were tunnels, but the most famous method of trying to escape was they built a glider. The prisoners went up into the attic, made a false wall, and built a glider. Now, they built it out of stolen wood, and they took months and months to try to build it. And it was going to take, I think, 2 passengers. And it was going to be fired off a ramp they were going to build in disguise out of the back of this castle. I don't quite know how, because it was never actually used. The camp was liberated by the Americans today, April 16th, 1945. And this photograph of the glider was taken by one of those liberating Americans. It was never actually used because the camp was liberated. But I do wish they had tried. Anyway, there you have it. Megiddo, Armageddon, Cullodon, and Colditz liberated today. That's April the 16th. See you later. Have a good time, everybody. And I hope, if I can stop my recording, that you enjoyed that, and I'll see you all tomorrow. Come back here. Stop recording. Yes. Bye-bye.